Thank you guys for being here and coming to listen to my speech. I wanted to talk to you guys about something that I find very important and something that I feel very passionately about. But before we get started, I want to do a little bit of an experiment. I want everybody to just close their eyes for a second. And I want you to imagine your favorite childhood snack. I'm going to close my eyes too. Okay, everybody got one? Okay. My favorite childhood snack was always the freeze pops. I loved them, especially in the summer. We'd be playing outside all day and then we'd come back and we'd grab a freeze pop. My favorite was the pink. That was my absolute favorite. And we would eat so many of those during the summer. And I'm sure that the ones that you thought of too are bright and colorful, because a lot of the snacks that we remember as children are these bright, colorful snacks, right? And those snacks have something in them called food dye, which most of us are very familiar with at this point because it's in most of our foods and a lot of our drinks. And most of us think that this food dye is harmless because it's in everything, right? So it has to be harmless. It can't be in everything if it's something that's really bad for us. But unfortunately, what we're finding now, after a lot of research, is that food dye isn't actually as innocent as we may think. And in this speech, I want to talk to you a little bit about the negative effects that food dyes have on children. And before that, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of food dye when it first started to be introduced into our food and into the American diet. And we're going to talk about countries that have already been in the forefront of banning these food dyes and a little bit of the science behind it. And then we're going to talk about the physiological symptoms that they have specifically on children's bodies. So most of us, again, just assume that food dye has kind of always been in our diet and always been in our food. But it was actually invented by a man in 1857. And the FDA first approved the use of food dyes in things like cheeses and butters. And it was used to market more to people and make it more interesting looking so that people wanted to buy it more. During that time, these were considered safe. And again, there were 9 different dyes along the way that were considered to be safe for human consumption. But unfortunately, not all of them were harmless. And after investigation, the FDA released a list of only 7 safe dyes that were allowed to be used in the United States. Most of us are familiar with the normal food dyes. We're thinking about the red 40s and the blue number 2, yellow 5, and these are things that are in a lot of the foods that we consume and a lot of the foods that we have for our children. And most of our candies, our fruit snacks, a lot of our juices, some of our chips, and actually some of our seasonings contain food dye. And it depends on where they're processed, whether or not they have food dye in them. But the question is, why is this a problem? Why is it an issue? Why is it a problem that there's food dye in most of the foods that we eat, and specifically the foods that we give to our children? My kids love it. They love the color. They're more apt to eat it if it's colorful. I remember when I was a kid back in the 90s, they wanted children to consume more vegetables. And at this time, which is funny now, but at that time, ketchup was considered a vegetable. So what they did was they put food dye into ketchup and they made it purple and they made it green. And it made kids want to eat it and want to consume it more. So again, most people think that this is harmless. But unfortunately, recently, food dye has been outed for having some severe behavioral complications in children and causing symptoms that mimic or mirror ADHD specifically and autism symptoms. Now, ADHD and autism has been on a rise since the 1970s, and we've seen a steady increase in the amount of autism and ADHD related cases in the United States, but also ADHD and autism related symptoms. And people have been trying to figure out why, and there's been a lot of speculation along the way as to why these things are happening. And some people claim that it's vaccines, and some people claim that it's the water, and some people claim that it's the fluoride. But what we have noticed, and what scientists have been able to discover after a lot of research, is that food dyes, specifically red 40, have autism and ADHD manifestations in children who might already be susceptible to these things. A lot of European countries have actually already started banning food dyes or they put a warning label on the food dyes that are similar to nicotine purchases, where they have to put a warning label and tell you that this can cause cancer. And I feel as though parents should be educated about the dangers of food dye, and they should be told that there could be a possibility that these things could affect their children. And my hope is that if I continue to advocate for these things, perhaps it will make a change, and perhaps it will force people to start looking a little bit closer at the things that they're eating or the things that they're feeding their children, and maybe it will make a change. Maybe Florida will be the next state that will make change and start banning food dyes, or at least putting warning labels and educating parents about what they're actually giving to their children, because again, it's a disservice to them. It's unfair that they don't know the potential dangers or harm they could be doing to their children. In this speech, we talked a little bit about the history of food dyes, where they came from, and when they started to be introduced into foods. We talked a little bit about the manifestations of symptoms in children and how they can affect them. And we also talked about states that started banning food dyes already. My hope in this speech to you is that you think a little bit about, again, the things that you're feeding to your children and how you can eliminate these things from their diet. There are many companies that make snacks for children that don't put food dyes in them. And they have other bears that are made with. There's companies that make gummy bears. Gummy bears are something that are known to have food dyes in them. Blueberries or strawberries. Paprika for Cheez-Its is a color that mimics yellow, so you don't have to use the food dye in the foods. Again, I'm really hoping that this speech has inspired some of you maybe to take a closer look at what you're giving to your children, and also maybe do a little bit of research for yourself. And I challenge you, if you do have a child who has manifestations of ADHD or autism or symptoms that you're not sure about, or a little bit of hyperactivity, I challenge you to eliminate those things from their diet and see if there is a change. Because I can assure you that even if it doesn't make a change, it does have a better impact on your children's lives when you eliminate these food dyes from their diet. Thank you so much for being here, and I appreciate you listening to my speech.